Greetings, and thank you for being here for today's Innovations in Tobacco Control lecture. I am Jared Early, a communications associate at the Institute for Global Tobacco Control, and it's my delight to welcome you for a discussion of the role of journalism and investigative reporting in addressing the tobacco epidemic. Today, we are joined by two journalists from The Examination, an independent nonprofit newsroom whose motto is Fearless Journalism for a Healthier World, and whose stories provide insight into the actions, motivations, and effects of industries responsible for millions of preventable deaths, the tobacco industry among them. In the 2 years since its inception, The Examination has published more than 200 stories, reaching millions of readers. Its reporting has garnered widespread praise and award recognition, while also, more importantly, informing action to support public health, expose public health threats, and help to lead real-world change. In a few moments, we'll hear from María Pérez, a senior reporter at The Examination, whose recent coverage of big tobacco has spanned the Philippines, Laos, South Korea, Latin America, Canada, and the United States. Perez's previous reporting has included labor and social justice issues, such as injuries and fatalities involving cosmetic surgery clinics, and issues affecting immigrant communities. Her writing has appeared in USA Today, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, the El Nuevo Herald, and Naples Daily News, where a 2017 investigative report won the prestigious George Polk Award. A native of Spain, Perez has also reported for El Mundo in Madrid. She earned a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University and was the recipient of an O'Brien Fellowship in Public Service Journalism. And kicking things off, we will hear from Madlen Davies, a senior editor at The Examination, who previously served as the investigations editor for the BMJ and as the global health correspondent at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. In addition to investigations involving the tobacco epidemic and public health, Davies' work includes reporting on tactics to limit abortion access in the United States, investigating the spread of misinformation by a gas company, and covering Pfizer's demands on state governments as they negotiated for COVID vaccines. Davies earned a master's degree in magazine journalism from City St. George's, University of London, and her stories have earned multiple awards, including the Association of British Science Writers Steve Connor Award for Investigative Journalism in 2021 and 2019, and the Foreign Press Association's Science Story of the Year in 2021. It's my honor on behalf of the Institute for Global Tobacco Control at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health to welcome both of these esteemed journalists. Please join me in welcoming Maria and Madlen.
Hi, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here and to tell you a little bit about what we do at The Examination. We are very excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much, Jared. Great to be here. Really excited for this presentation and questions. So yes, as Jared mentioned, I'm Madlen Davies, and this is María Pérez, my colleague. We're from The Examination, which, as he mentioned, was an independent nonprofit newsroom with one purpose: to expose the powerful forces behind millions of preventable deaths. And our journalism is designed to equip communities with the information they need to take action. So as Maria has put up this slide here, Maria and I have been working for the past 2 years on the big tobacco beat. As you can see here, The Examination's model is that we partner with newsrooms all over the world to publish our work. So here are some of our select partners, not all, from big legacy papers to nonprofit investigative outlets to medical journals. So I'm going to give a very brief whistle-stop tour overview of the ways that we've shown that the tobacco industry influences public health policy. And then Maria will deep dive into 3 stories that she's done. I don't think any of the themes that I'll mention will be a surprise to you. I think most of you as public health professionals will know, in theory at least, how the industry influences policy. But our job as journalists is to get evidence and prove concrete examples of this. So we all know that it happens. We've revealed the tangible examples. So the first way is just undermining or weakening the public health policies directly. So here on the left, you can see we did a story about China Tobacco, the world's biggest tobacco company, which is state-owned. So those running the company are able to influence health policies in the country because they're part of the government. So China joined the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which, as you all know, is a public health treaty designed to reduce smoking and prevent industry interference, in 2003. But the country watered down or failed to implement many of the policies it promised to, including plain packaging, bans on smoking in public, etc., etc. And here on the right, you can see another story we did about the UK's generational ban bill. So the generational smoking ban, again, as you all, I imagine, will know, is a radical policy that would reduce the age at which people can buy cigarettes. So eventually that would outlaw smoking among younger generations. So it's a pretty big deal for the tobacco industry. So we wrote about tobacco companies' overt lobbying about this. They contacted governments and made a whole slew of arguments about why it was a terrible idea. And also, more importantly, made legal threats to the government that they would sue if this policy was brought in. So that's the overt lobbying and the legal threats. Then there's the slightly more covert stuff. So tobacco companies often influence policy by influence policymakers themselves. So here you can see we wrote a couple of stories about lawmakers in the UK who added amendments to the UK's generational ban bill that would significantly weaken it, or in some cases, change it into a completely different policy after being lobbied by tobacco companies. So one very prominent politician was flown out by Philip Morris International to its Swiss lab, for example, and then afterwards made these amendments on the bill. And another this is again on influencing policymakers. We found that Philip Morris International lobbied EU Commission trade officials. So the company sought help on a number of issues, including overturning bans on its heated tobacco product IQOS in multiple countries, including Vietnam and Mexico. And we found that on 3 occasions, surprisingly for me, trade officials actually did act in ways that would have benefited the company. So health ministries are often, not always, but often resistant to industry lobbying. So we found that often the companies try influencing trade officials or government officials in other departments that are concerned with the country's economies. And in a similar vein, one theme that has come up regularly in our reporting and our stories is companies promising that they will invest in a country, build a factory there or expand their current factory or invest in another way, either with a veiled suggestion or a completely transparent suggestion that the country approves more lenient regulations around tobacco and nicotine products. And sometimes it's the other way around. It's more of a veiled threat. So you can see here, we did a story in Kenya where we found that British American Tobacco threatened to pull out its factory investment in the country unless the Kenyan government agreed to make health warnings on the company's nicotine pouches much smaller. And the Kenyan government did actually agree to the company's demands in this case. And then another huge theme for us, looking at the ways that the industry influences public health policy, is the ways that they work with scientists and the ways that this is not always declared publicly. So in this case, we found Juul paid a supposedly independent researcher thousands of euros to lobby the Israeli health ministry against a ban on high-strength vapes. The researcher failed to declare the Juul payment in his studies, despite being required to do so. So this is really important because if Juul relays a message to the health ministry, don't ban high-strength vapes, they might listen, but they understand the vested interest. Whereas if a supposedly independent academic, an expert on the topic, relays this view and provides them with his studies, they might be more inclined to listen. And on a similar note, companies also seek to influence public health policy by influencing doctors and medical practice. So here we found Philip Morris International paying for medical education courses on Medscape, where doctors could learn all about using harm reduction products like e-cigarettes. to help people quit smoking. So that is a very, very much a whistle-stop tour of the common themes that come up in our reporting about the ways in which the industry influences public health policy. All those stories are available to read on the tobacco page of our website. And now Maria will go into a bit more depth about 3 of her stories.
To tell you a little bit more about how we do things, the behind the scenes about how we report the facts that we need for our stories. And the first story I'm going to talk about is one where we found that industry money was funding groups that were in Latin America that were lobbying for less restrictive regulations for new nicotine products. These groups often said that they represented consumers of new nicotine products, former smokers who had quit thanks to, they said, these new nicotine products. We reported this story with 5 other news organizations in Latin America. This is something that we always try to do. We work with organizations because we actually write about the whole world. We try to work with organizations who are present in the communities that are more affected by the specific stories that we write. And you can see here in this slide what we found. You can see that we found that funding from Philip Morris International ended up in the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World that now has a different name, and was, at least before, was exclusively funded by Philip Morris International. This foundation provided grants to other organizations that in turn either provided grants or employed these individuals or groups in Latin America who then went to their policymakers to ask for fair regulations. If you want to check the story, you have the QR code then. You're going to see that for every story that I talk about. And how did we track the money? So we track the money using a lot of records. Non-profits in the U.S., including foundations, they have to provide certain information to the government about who funds them and what they do with their money. That information is public. You can access it in different avenues. And that's how we figure out the first layer of expenses, like the money that the foundation was providing directly to different organizations. But then you have to do more because that record doesn't tell you where the money ends after those organizations get it. So, for example, we look at corporate records, especially in Colombia, where we found that the president of the Colombian group not only get the money on behalf of the group to set up, to design a website, but he was also the co-owner of the company that designed the website. So we were able to prove not only that the group got the money to do something, but also that he personally, as co-owner of the company, got that funding. We also use websites, and especially archive websites that can contain information that is very interesting. Sometimes when you go into the social media groups or accounts of these groups, you can see old posts, and the old posts have addresses for websites that might no longer exist. But if you go into the Wayback Machine, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it's like an internet archive. You look for Wayback Machine and you will have it. And if you write the URL address there, it will tell you if it has an old version of the website stored. And that's how we were able to check that some of these, that at least one of these people and groups got funding that came from this pile of money. Also, LinkedIn, social media. There was a YouTube video that had very few views. I don't know if it was like a dozen, don't quote me on that. But where these people explain that they had gotten these grants to to followers or to people who were interested in getting them. And it was like a YouTube video that I found looking at their social media accounts, and that had very few views. But like if you have to do this work of finding it, so that that one had a great information that was super helpful for us. We also had to do other reporting in addition to figure out how to track the money. We need to figure out what they did, right? How they work to influence public policy. So one way how we did it was by looking at their social media posts, where they usually posted, we have sent this letter to these policymakers, or we have been in this hearing. And then if you wanted to know what they have said in that hearing, you wanted to check the letter, you wanted to know what they said in that hearing because you wanted to know what they said, and also because you wanted to know whether they had disclosed any funding that they might have gotten that initially came from Philip Morris International, right? So in the websites of the different legislatures around the world, usually you have pages where you can track the history of a bill, and those pages have like the dates of when the hearings happen. And usually legislatures usually have a YouTube channel where they post hearings, at least for the past few years. So with the date, you can search for the hearing, and then you can listen to it and figure out what was said in that hearing. It's a lot. Sometimes you hear those while you're making dinner or folding laundry, and then when something important comes up, you sit down and you take notes, because sometimes you not only want to hear what they are saying, but also what other people were saying. Then there is a lot of unseen reporting that goes into these stories, and that is going to happen across stories. For this story, for example, I was trying to track to see if there were other groups in other countries that had received funding that initially came from Philip Morris International, and I had my suspicions, but I wasn't able to prove it. So that is not in the story, even though it was reporting that I did. And that is going to happen in most stories that we write. Something that also happens with every story that we write is we ask for responses. We ask everyone we talk about to address what we talk about. We first ask for an interview. Then if they refuse to give us an interview, we send them an email outlining all the significant findings of our reporting to give them a chance to address them, because we want to be accurate. Accurate is our basic need. Our stories need to be accurate. We need to give them an opportunity to address what they say, for them to say, oh, you're wrong, or you're not wrong, but I did it because of this, or you are misinterpreting X or Y. And we give them plenty of time to address those issues. Also, we have to write with clarity so that everyone understands us and it's easy to track the information. We need to be precise, and we do present the stories not only with tests, but also with videos, as you're going to see in a moment. And something about being brief, we need to distill the essence for readers. It's very important that they read the stories, that they want to read the story, and they find them appealing. So maybe sometimes you have come across a journalist and you might have spoken with that journalist for an hour or half an hour, and then maybe one of your quotes makes it into the story, or even none of your quotes makes it into the story. I just want to say this is not because what you said was not valuable. It's because we need to really summarize our reporting, everything, all the documents that we read, all the information that we have, to distill and really condense the story and present the essential things that a reader has to. But we ourselves need a lot more information to be able to speak authoritatively about something. What you tell us is not only about what appears in the story, but also on how we frame things, how we describe things, and what is touched upon in the story and what is not in the story. So if that has happened to you, we are sorry, but know that what you said was very useful for the story and is necessary for us. We couldn't write those stories, at least not in the same way, if you hadn't talked with us. And then the last step that we conduct is the fact-checking. Once the draft is logged, it has gone through editing. I guess I jump over that step, but usually we write a draft and then editors edit that draft and we go back and forth for a while until we get it into the best shape and the most appealing shape for readers. Then we do the fact-checking, and the fact-checking means that the reporter goes through, and sometimes a fact-checker goes through every sentence, every word in the story and makes sure that it's accurate. And that means going back to the source document in which we were based to say that statement, going back to the original interview, sometimes remaking calculations just to make sure that everything, exactly all that is in the story, is correct and accurate. So those final steps are steps that happen for every story. The second story I'm gonna talk about is another story also based in Latin America that we wrote about capsule cigarettes, or like they call them in Chile, click cigarettes. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. Those are not cigarettes that you see in the US. Usually, well, maybe some menthol cigarettes you could see in the US. But these are cigarettes that have capsules in their filters. Those capsules are filled with flavorings. And when you light the cigarette up and you crush that capsule, then the smoke that you inhale can taste like watermelon, strawberry, apple, blueberry. Usually you have a menthol capsule too, and you can combine both. And what kids describe those flavors as almost like chewing gum, like very candy, artificial, sweet, fruity flavors. And this type of cigarettes, the brands have very exotic names, I would say, adventurous names like Aruba Sunrise or Exotic Zest or Tokyo Midnight. And when I first heard about it, and it was a tobacco control researcher who told me about this, I was very interested, because the brands that the companies that she was telling me about that put out these cigarettes were brands that have also committed to help smokers quit, that have said that they don't want any more smokers in the world, that they want to help them switch to their newer products or quit. And at the same time, they were releasing these products that people said were made more appealing as smoking for young people, right? So what we had, and this is, for example, it was not said where we were going to focus, but we said we focus in Latin America because we got some data from Euromonitor that you can see there that showed that the market share of this type of products had grown exponentially in many Latin American countries. Also in other countries, but most of the countries where it had grown that much were in Latin America, right? And by the way, this is market share of all cigarettes sold. It's not sales, right? But then we needed to answer some more questions. We needed to answer whether this type of cigarettes are hurting public health, if they make it easier for people to start smoking. What were the companies who were really behind these cigarettes? And also whether those companies were doing something to promote the cigarettes, to increase demand, and to influence public policy on this. So one of the things to answer the first question, we turn to research. There is some research, not a ton, about how capsule cigarettes that are not only menthol cigarettes but also have other flavors are more appealing to kids, and that suggests and like indicates that in fact this type of cigarettes are more appealing to kids. There is my sense is that there is way less research on this than, for example, on flavors for vaping, though you can to some extent also apply that research to cigarettes, there's not a ton. But the other thing that was really important to us is to hear from kids, to hear from young people themselves, because that's what the reader is going to connect with, and that's also going to give us the specifics so that we can explain to the reader how these cigarettes may make it easier for people to start smoking. So I'm gonna play you a little bit of a video that we did where we recorded some people in Chile talking about this. The video is in Spanish, but you have subtitles in English. Let's see if it works.
Yo empecé a fumar con 13 años.
A los 12 años.
Yo empecé a fumar a los 12. Yo fumaré 5 o 6 veces al día.
Entre los 13 y los 14.
Empecé con cigarros sin clic porque vi a alguien fumando y le robé un cigarro a mi mamá y no le agarré el gusto.
La popularidad de estos llamados cigarrillos con clic ha crecido rápidamente durante la última década y son promocionados en modos que, expertos afirman, son atractivos para un grupo más joven.
Empecé a fumar a los 15 años, empecé fumando Coleman Click azul. Anterior a eso había fumado cigarrillos sin click, no me generaban como mayor interés ni buen gusto porque eran muy fuertes.
Fue niño cuando probé el cigarro, pero era malo, amargo. Y por esa cuestión no quería seguir fumando. Cuando probé este cigarro con Pullman con Click, sentí el sabor del cigarro mucho más cómodo.
And I'm going to stop it here. You can see the rest of the video if you're interested in our website. But this gives you an idea of what these kids told us and what they thought about this type of cigarettes. And you can also see that my narration skills aren't that great, but I'm working on that. So the next question that we wanted to answer is whether these companies that were putting out these cigarettes were doing something to increase demand for the cigarettes, to promote them, other than just keep producing them, and especially what actions they had taken since they committed to a future without cigarettes or to a future where they would help smokers quit or switch to their newer products, right? What we found is that Philip Morris International released at least 30 new brands in Latin America, and British American Tobacco released at least 27 since they took those commitments, right? And how did we get to these numbers? It took a long time. We had to figure out if different countries had information about when each brand was released into the market, on what dates. And to be able to figure that out, we reviewed national laws, and we also spoke with advocates or researchers or public officials in different countries. Now there are more countries than the ones that we were able to get information for, but that's what we had to do to figure out where the information was. And then once we knew that, yes, that information existed, we had to either get it online if it was publicly available or request it from government authorities if it was not, through public records requests, right? Figure out also the different ways and the exact people to whom we had to send a request. So it was a process. And then, because this information usually only got the names of the brands, we had to check whether those brands were actually of capsule cigarettes. And you could guess because of the names. They had this type of names that usually capsule cigarettes have, but we needed to make sure, like, I guess it's not good enough, right? So we check against online stores and other available resources. And I want to give a shout out to the Remap project. This project has been collecting packages in different Latin American countries, and they are uploading those packages of cigarettes to that website that you see there with photos. And one of the things that they do is they classify whether they are capsule cigarettes or not, and they put photos of the capsules. So that's a research that was very helpful for us to be able to count how many brands that were released had capsules and how many didn't have. I mean, the at least number of how many had capsules, right? We also tried to figure out what marketing actions these companies took to promote the cigarettes. And then the other thing that we did is we tried to figure out how they had tried to affect public policy regarding these cigarettes. And these couple of examples that we found were really interesting to me. In Chile, they had spent nearly 15 years fighting a ban on flavored cigarettes. And if I can go back, look at the market share. I think it was, if I remember right, I think it was around 2009 or 2010, 11, when they started to fight those bans. And you can see here for Chile the market share back then, right? It was really small. And since then, the controller who rejected an early flavor ban via regulation from the government had been a lawyer representing British American Tobacco. That's one of the things that we found through a public records request. Then, years after the ban, they were trying to introduce the ban via law. When it was debated in the Senate, British American Tobacco threatened to close its operations in Chile, which is similar to what Maddie was talking about earlier. And then years after, this bill passed the Senate, but it had to go to the other chamber of parliament, and it got stuck there. I think it's still stuck there. And after British American Tobacco had committed to their mission of phasing out cigarettes or helping the smokers quit or switch to newer products, British American Tobacco argued that banning flavors right now it would increase smuggling, that a lot of people were already smoking this type of cigarettes, and that if you ban them, like, smuggling would go up. People would just buy them illegal from the illegal or illicit stock in the country. Another example that we found was in Brazil. There had been industry lawsuits that were pausing or stopping the enforcement of a flavor ban. But I think it was a decade or more than that. I think the lawsuits are still active, and the ban, as far as I know, has not yet been enforced. There's another court decision that they are waiting on. And the third story, and those were examples of how they influence public policy or regarding this, right? The third story that I wanna talk to you about is one in Asia, and it's about how imperial brands signed a confidential agreement in Laos with the Lao government that kept that froze taxes or kept taxes at a very low level, and subsequently that helped or contributed to keep prices for cigarettes low. Research shows that higher taxes on cigarettes are one of the most effective tools to reduce smoking rates. So this type of deal probably had a public health impact in Laos. The first thing we did, Jason McClure, my coworker Jason McClure, was leading this story. He obtained this confidential contract between the government and Imperial. And this contract stipulated that the state company was going to be privatized, Imperial and the government were going to be part of this venture, this new venture. And in addition to that, there was a Singapore company that was going to also be part of this venture. And I think early on, Jason heard that a tycoon who was profiting from this venture was a relative of the then prime minister, who was the prime minister when this deal was signed. But we didn't really have the evidence. You would think that maybe like newspapers would talk about the relationship between these two people, but they did not. Also, Laos is really freedom of the press is not their strength. So we had to look into a bunch of documents, and it took a while to be able to confirm that relationship. A lot of the evidence came from the documents in an international legal dispute that we were able to get hold of. It was related to the tycoon. By the way, the tycoon was an in-law of the former prime minister. The kids were married. And we were able to get a lot of evidence for that from the documents in that legal dispute. We also looked in social media to figure out if we could confirm that relationship through the Facebook accounts of the wives and the daughters. And then we also looked into, we were also able to obtain a self-published book that this tycoon wrote or published or wrote with the help of, I think he wrote it with the help of a ghostwriter, if I'm right, or someone else wrote it about him. I don't remember any longer. But it was a book where he talked about his life. And then the other thing that we had to do is we wanted to track how much money this relative had made of this venture. For that, we were able to get corporate records in Singapore that told us what percentage of the company owned, how much money that company had made, and that way we were able to calculate how much money, I think it was 27 million, if I remember right, that he had made from his initial investment. And something that was really helpful too was in US court records, we found some statement on behalf of him, his lawyers said that, saying that this company that participated in the tobacco venture was only a holding company and really did not have any function in the whole venture other than pretty much holding shares for them. So it was not that it didn't look like it was contributing to the strategic decisions from the venture. And that's the last story I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to end by saying, please contact us. We don't know what is happening on the ground unless you and people like you tell us. So we mainly, the type of stories we do are stories that have some degree of accountability, where someone is doing something wrong or someone is doing something that hurts public health and something that people don't know about, or that we don't know the extent to of what they are doing. So if you come across something and think, it would be interesting that someone look into it, please email us, message us on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. You have there all of our information, because unless you tell us, we probably won't know about it. Even if you don't have all the pieces together, we can look into that. But yeah, like I know many of you, for example, are going to SRNT in the US. If in the conference you come across some gossip or evidence of that something that is wrong is happening, please let us know. And then the last thing is please subscribe to our newsletter. Not only my boss will be very happy if you do, also I think you will find their stories that you will find interesting and useful for your work. With that, I think it's time for questions.
Thank you so much, both of you, Madlen and Maria. This was really interesting to dive behind the curtain of your research and get that behind the scenes tour through your entire process. We do have time for some questions, so if you are in the audience and have some, please use the Q&A box to submit them. To start things out, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the impact you have seen from these stories that you shared or others that you've shared, impact on really any scale. And along with that, can you tell us about any response you may have received from the tobacco industry after the publication of your coverage?
Maddie, do you want to start with the impact part?
Sure, yeah. So we had some impact recently on a story. It was the story that I mentioned about a independent researcher who was paid 7,000 euros by Juul to lobby the Israeli Health Ministry, who were considering a ban on high-strength vapes. So the researcher had failed to declare that Juul payment in his, when he was submitting papers for publication in academic journals. He was asked what his conflicts of interest were, and under the stipulations of the journal, this is a payment that should have been declared. It was a financial conflict of interest, and he failed to declare it. And so as a result, we contacted all the journals that he'd published in for 3 years after that payment had been made. And all have come back to us saying they're investigating. So we're waiting to see, will there be an updated conflict of interest or any further action being taken on that? So that was a very tangible piece of impact. Maria, do you want to talk about some of the impact on your stories?
Truly, to be honest, I cannot say that a law was approved passing after one of the stories. I think the one item I would probably stick to is there was video that someone did about click cigarettes, and it had something like 300,000 views. An influencer did a video on that, and I'm just hoping that people and communities are better informed about the risks of these products. It's sometimes hard to get impact after what you write on these types of stories, but an impact can have a long way to come. But at this point, we feel, and one of the things that I feel is that you need to keep writing about it because that's the only way to, show public opinion what is happening.
We just had one other notable piece of impact on the story about British American Tobacco threatening to pull their investment in a Kenyan factory if the government, so that the government agreed to make health warnings on nicotine pouches much smaller. After we published that story, the government kind of did a U-turn and said it would reconsider making those health warnings much smaller and would consider having, the bigger graphic health warnings as were originally proposed. So those are cases, of really tangible impact. As Maria said, in other cases, the impact we'd seek to have would be, equipping communities with information that they can use in their own campaigning, and the cycle of change can take a long time. But yeah, we do hope our work is useful.
Thank you. Definitely useful, and a lot of questions here. One kind of inquiring about policy from the information access perspective, and whether there have been any changes, or maybe are there movements in process to make it easier to access information for journalists like yourself, or to increase economic transparency, for instance.
Transparency varies a lot by country, Usually, what I try to do is figure out who has the information and see if someone can vouch for me, and have a conversation with someone at the department that has the information. So that is not just a request out of the blue that is easy for them to deny, right? It's sometimes we are lucky with requests, and sometimes we are less lucky with that. But with some requests, we have had amazing information that we have gotten through them. As to whether there is a movement to increase transparency, I guess that would depend on each country. Journalists were always pushing for more transparency, right? That's our thing. But I don't know of any global movement to increase transparency around the world. In tobacco, you have this. It's a little bit special because the FCTC, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, does say that as much as possible, meetings between politicians, lawmakers, regulators, and the tobacco industry should be in the open. That is not always followed. In a ton of times, it's not followed. Different countries have different ways of adapting and enforcing that provision.
Well, we have a couple of questions here that I want to link together in terms of the reader, really, and the public. And first of all, any sort of strategies that the examination has for ensuring that its readership isn't limited to those working either in work around tobacco control and public health, or work around big tobacco and industry interests. So, sort of how do you transcend that bubble to start? And then how do you feel that the stories you create contribute to public opinion or public outrage, for that matter?
That's a very important question for us. One of the ways in which we do that is by working with news organizations that have presence in the communities that are most affected by our stories. Those news organizations usually have a more general audience, and they know how to reach that audience. So that helps us a lot to reach the people who are affected by the stories. We are also having some audience build up. We are a very new news organization. We are just 3 years now? Yeah, not quite 3 years. In September, it will be 3 years since we first published. So we are still building our audience, and we are trying to make sure we reach people affected by this through online sites. We don't want to produce content only that is specialized, but also content that is appealing to people who want to be able to reach out to, like this, for example, this influencer who talk about the flavored cigarettes story on her Instagram feedback. Their followers were not public health experts, right? They were regular people. So those are some ways in which we try, and in addition, we try to write our stories in a way that general readers would understand, I would find attractive and appealing to read. And in formats like this video, for example, that I just showed you, that general reader would find interesting and appealing to read. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Maddie.
Yeah, just that the examination is very lucky and has a unique role of somebody called an impact editor, whose full-time job it is to take our journalism and make sure it's useful off the page and in the real world. And so, I've worked at legacy media like the BBC and kind of national papers in the UK, and they're really, you write your story. You might send it to some people, but you're kind of on to the next story. Whereas the examination is a lot more thoughtful in thinking, how could this journalism be useful, and how can we make sure it gets in front of the people that could affect change. So even when we're deciding which stories to write, we think about which are the most impactful. And so, as Maria said, we have a kind of publication strategy where we might publish with a newsroom focused on young people, if that's the audience we really want to reach, as well as a medical journal so that we reach the professional audience, as well as a big legacy paper where policymakers might read it and be able to affect change. And then along with our impact editor, we'd often do a lot of work. She just organised a roundtable event where the shareholders of car companies came to talk about lead pollution in car batteries, or running a WhatsApp group for affected communities in Nigeria who've been poisoned by lead battery recycling. So yeah, we do a lot of work in that space to make our journalism kind of live off the page.
And on that note, if you guys want to spread the word about the examination to their relatives, students, collaborators, friends, we will be super thankful for that.
Sure. And, knowing that there are many people who work in public health and public health research in the audience today, you had mentioned a little in your reporting on capsule cigarettes that you had maybe wished to see a little more evidence around a topic. And so to the extent that academic research functions into your own research, what other areas, or where would you like to see the science dive deeper? This is you're speaking to the researchers here. What would you like to see them research or expand on their research?
Oh my God. I mean, I don't think I can direct research, right? That's not a job for me. It's a job for researchers. But something that we find very useful. For example, I did a story in our early days about what research could tell you about vaping. The risks, whether it leads people into smoking or not, whether it helps people quit smoking. And something that I found really, really hard is that there were reviews that disagreed with each other on many things. I'm guessing because it's relative, the science on vaping, even is now 20 years old, it's relatively young, especially to account for the harms of vaping. But something that it would be super helpful for me is if someone put together some analysis of what the different reviews and positions of, that are solid, right? Because you don't want to have outliers that say things without a scientific basis. But if someone could put all the reviews together and say, okay, this is where researchers agree, this is where the researchers disagree, and this is why they disagree, and this is what we need to figure out an answer. That would be, as a journalist, that would be super helpful for me. In a specific for every new nicotine product. Now I'm trying to look a little bit in the nicotine pouches. There's not a ton of research on them either, on possible harms, whether they might lead some people to smoking or not, whether they are helpful to quit smoking or not. So like if someone can do that, or a committee or someone, that I think not only for me but for every journalist would be super helpful. With flavored cigarettes, that was very interesting to me that I didn't see much research on that, because vaping, we still need to know a ton about their harms, right? But for cigarettes, we already know. So it was kind of a little bit striking to me that there was not more research about whether those specific cigarettes were more made people start smoking, right? But for example, nicotine pouches is a product that now is growing a lot, and I would love to see more research on that too, or at least some sort of document or something, or committee that told me, okay, this is what we know, this is where people disagree, this is where people don't disagree, and this is why, and this is what we still need to do to understand these key points.
That's great. We've heard your call. You've shared your contact information. You've left room on your list. Maybe if Madlen has one thing to add there as far as requests.
Requests. I mean, I always wish researchers would name the companies that they're researchers about. So often, you get a really fantastic study showing lots of harms, and I can completely understand why the researchers haven't named the exact brands or the companies. And so that's kind of difficult for us, in that we really want to take that research and do something with it, but it's kind of too general. So I completely understand, nobody wants to get sued by a tobacco company. But yeah, publishing the names of the companies or the brands that you're doing research on would be incredibly helpful.
Well, this conversation has been incredibly helpful as well. We do need to leave it there for today, but want to thank you both for joining us, Madlen Davies and María Pérez of The Examination. Thank you for sharing with us how to engage with your work and how attendees and anyone watching this can get in touch if they maybe have a lead to contribute in our joint mission of ending tobacco-caused death and disease. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, and we'll be back in March and April with additional lectures that will be announced soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone, and thank you, Jared.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity of being here.